All right. So now we're gonna share screen, and you should. I hope you all are seeing that. Y'all see? Does it say prologue? Does everybody see prologue?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. I see prologue.
Yes. Okay, off we go. I'm so sorry. But this spillage thing is the first time I've spilled liquid on a computer since never. And we've had a computer in our house since 1978, the TRS-80 Radio Shack computer. All right, so here's what we're going to cover today. I just want to say something about more about Boris Nemtsov, who we talked about. He's another protester. And I want to say a few words about the victory parade. That's fresh on our minds. Then we'll finish up Ukraine between 2013 and 2015, and that's pushing the envelope. You know, the history on that is maybe not mature. And then at the very end, I anticipate there'll be some time left over, and we look ahead to what's next. Is it California history? I'll give you a few teasers, like how California got its name. I'll do a little show and tell on two famous people that were alive in Martinez as a teaser, part of California history. And then just an announcement about June 1st when Ramsey's gone. All right, so off we go. Boris Nemtsov. So you'll remember last time he was an active Democrat in the 90s, and so he was well positioned to greet Putin as a representative of the Democratic wing that wanted to remake Russia in the East's image. And this is 2000, right after Putin gets power. And he's still at the table. In 2008, he's part of a delegation that Putin sends to meet with Obama. I don't know if Putin sends him, but Putin lets them go. 2009, but then as we saw, along with Navalny, he becomes the leader of protests. And like Navalny, he is a target. And unfortunately, they murder him on the bridge to the Kremlin, the Bolshoi Moscow bridge. So you remember that story, that sad story we told last week. So this week, just keeping our ears open and ears to the ground. Here's his daughter, and she appeared on an Intelligence Squared podcast, which I find very high quality. And she and this guy, Ben Noble, they know what the hell is going on in Russia now and public opinion. And what are the other voices that could be significant. And she even talks about the old Communist Party as being one of the last hopes in Russia today. So yeah, run that podcast down if you're interested in hearing more about the level and the condition of dissent within Russia. So this is the Victory Day parade that we saw when we were doing the section on Victory Day parade celebrating World War II. What a big thing that is. 2008, Netanyahu with flowers. Here this year, there are no foreign delegations and to enjoy Victory Day with. And Putin delivers his speech, which didn't say much about World War II. He forgot to throw that in. And he talked mostly about the present. So he is very much fixated on the moment. I just got a notice using this old substitute computer, the internet, it might be a little unstable. Are you all still with me? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, off we go. So there was another Victory Day celebration. This one's in Kiev, and foreigners did come to visit and pay respects. Justin Trudeau was there, and the two of them got on an online meeting with the G7. That's a pretty powerful message. Putin gets nobody, and Zelensky gets to meet with the G7 in Kiev. And also down in the subway bomb shelter, Bono and U2 show up. The president of the German parliament shows up. We know that Tony Blinken was there with prominent American officials a week or so ago. And Jill Biden herself shows up alongside Zelensky's wife for Mother's Day. So there you are. What's the state of the map? It's relevant. This is unstable. Some of this could change within the next week or two for the better or for the worse. I'll just throw that in, and just looking at the map, it's just like, what's Putin's end game here? And so he's trying to open a land bridge. Mariupol's right in the middle of here somewhere. And if you look at the rivers, one thing he might be trying to do is to create and use the river as a boundary. If Putin can capture this land, and then he would have a barrier to, at least for a lot of the way, as a defense. But maintaining this now and keeping it is going to be a real challenge, particularly if Ukraine's able to push back. We know, since this map went up, that there's some blue arrows pushing up this way. The Russians are in retreat around Kharkiv, and they're blowing up bridges on this river. And you don't blow up a bridge if you're planning to regroup and come back. So they're in full retreat, and Kharkiv is probably gonna be saved, just like Kiev was. And we'll see how long Belarus hangs in there as an ally. Anyway, all this is a very dynamic, and Russia now has 80% of Donetsk. They had a third when the war started. So they've made some advances here, but can they keep it? And that's what we're going to see in the next couple of weeks. So back to the Ukraine in 2013. I've spent too much time talking about the present, which you know more than I do.
John, can I just make one comment?
Sure.
Which I heard.
Sure.
Yesterday at the victory parade, there was the annual walk to the tomb of the, I guess it's called the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Russian, but it's also the tomb of the heroic cities from World War II. And so Putin laid a wreath at the tomb of the heroic cities. Amongst the heroic cities are named Kiev and Odessa. On the same day that he's laying a wreath to the proud heritage and bravery of Odessa, there are missiles falling on Odessa.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Crazy. crazy.
Okay, back to the past.
Yeah, so we're gonna visit Odessa when we get to 2014. And so the Odessa story is very important, and that is something that's close to Irene's heart. Irene's ancestors are from Odessa, so I hope she'll watch the tape. All right, so 2013, we talked about this last time. Yankovic has gotten in the 2010 election because of the inability of the Orange Revolution people to organize. They split, the Yashchenko and the woman. I can't pronounce her name off the tip of my tongue. And they split, and he comes in and proves that the cost of disunity is you get Yankovic back, Putin's guy. So he's in charge, and on his watch, the Ukraine signs a letter of intent with the EU. Yankovic does that. Well, Putin makes him an offer he can't refuse, obviously, and I think the facial expressions tell the story. And Yankovic says, okay, I'll join the Commonwealth of Independent States. These are the former Soviet states that are mostly the stands. So he's going to join that along with Belarus. And the expectation of the Ukrainians is, hey, wait a minute, what happened to the EU letter of intent? We signed that. That was public. What's going on? And Russia's going to give us a lot of money, so you're going to accept that bribe, and the protests begin. We support the protests, and this is Hillary Clinton's assistant on Eastern Europe going down with donuts to the Maidan, which was Putin did not take that well. And so one thing leads to another, and it's violence. It's all out, called the Dignity Revolution, which the Ukrainians eventually win. And they get a new election and a government that is committed to continuing towards the EU. But here's the Odessa story. One of the worst atrocities of this fight between Ukrainians who wanted to join the EU and the Eastern Ukrainian faction that said, joining with Russia in the Commonwealth's a good idea. Who knew how sincere that was, and whether these were Putin's people that he had smuggled in? But there were people in the Ukraine dressed as civilians who were willing to fight for the Ukraine rejoining with the Russian sphere of influence. And in Odessa, the fighting centered around this building. And there were a group of pro-Russians trapped in the building. The building was set on fire, and it was a true atrocity. And outside opinion was, man, it was bad on both sides. But the main victims of this confrontation were pro-Russians. And so Putin didn't take that well. And who was responsible? Well, the Azov Battalion. And I want to say a few words about them because it's important to understand where they fit in and how different people can interpret their presence on the scene differently. So this is a very active group, a militia active along the Black Sea. In this country, think of some group like the Oath Keepers, just a pretty far right-wing militant guys. So this is the Azov battalion, and they're very active along the Black Sea. And they have been thought to be behind the atrocity in Odessa because they're active all along the Black Sea, and they're in Mariupol right now, as we'll see. And here they are at the factory outside of Mariupol. They're holed up in there, and they're refusing to surrender. Civilians were trapped in there, but the Azov Brigade got them out, or at least they're taking credit for them. So in the narrative, in the Ukrainian narrative, they're heroes who are helping civilians. In the Russian narrative, they're neo-Nazis. These are the neo-Nazis that Putin keeps talking about. They are brave. They are not going to surrender. They're gonna die, and a lot of them already have. 2,000 are still trapped in there, and this is the story of the hour. But let's go back to 2014 and look at where these guys came from, and their insignias. You can tell a lot from insignias on history and influence. And unfortunately, there are some symbols that trace back or can be traced back to the SS. This is the historic wolf trap heralding, and the wolf is a big thing. And what's the origin of that? In medieval times, they used these hooks and put it in the middle of meat, like a fish hook, to be swallowed by the wolf and to catch the wolf. Their founder was a far-right nationalist. We can find far-right nationalists in our country. There are far-right nationalists everywhere. And I showed last week Putin at the funeral of a far-right nationalist in Russia itself. And so you got this guy, and you've got volunteers coming from Europe. These happen to be Swedish, and you can imagine that that might be a problem. And the origin story, after the episode in Odessa, they took off and they grew, but they got their first combat experience in 2014, rebelling against Russia's attempt to reincorporate the Ukraine in their sphere of influence. Now they are officially in the National Guard. They're now contract soldiers for the Ukraine. And you can imagine the signal that sends to Putin. So when he's talking about neo-Nazis, that's what he's talking about. And even conservative estimates, 10 to 20% of this brigade were in fact neo-Nazis, and our Congress investigated them and blocked military aid on those grounds. John Conyers, noted liberal, led the investigation, found that called the Azov Battalion repulsive, and he pressured the Pentagon to stop funding Ukraine National Guard if they had Azov members. However, there was counter pressure from the Pentagon, and which was, hey, we need these, we may need these guys. And you could argue they're saying, I told you we would need them in Mariupol. But John Conyers lost that battle. And in 2015, the Azov Brigade was acceptable enough to meet with a foreign delegation that included American and Canadian soldiers. You look around and noodle around a little bit on the internet, and you find out that they also have combat training for civilians, including kids at summer camp. That's sobering. And they learn the different super nationalist, maybe right wing, maybe over nationalistic symbolism. I want to say I'm finished then with the Azov Brigade. If anybody has any comments, questions, observations.
Is that Connors the same one that got the equipment for Afghanistan?
John Conyers?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if he was involved in that.
Oh, maybe it sounded familiar.
No, I would doubt that. You may be thinking of the Texas congressman that went over to Afghanistan and had the movie made about him.
Yes.
With Tom Hanks.
What was his name?
I'll tell you tonight when I send you an email and it comes to me in my dreams. All right, I want to talk.
Well, John, if I may just a quick comment. Just back a few weeks, it was pretty well known, I think, that the Azov Battalion was extreme far right, and they did commit outrage in Odessa. And some people are arguing that the reason Mariupol, which was the first city, which looked like it was they were really trying to destroy it, that it was in retribution for the fact that it was the Azov Battalion which had originally grabbed it back from the Russian separatists. But what was interesting, I noticed over a few weeks, I suppose it was during March, was that there was a lot of apologetic stuff going on in respect to the Azov, that they had changed, they had been brought into the National Guard and they were a recognized battalion, and that Zelensky was applauding what they were doing. But that's all disappeared again now. And, you can get the idea almost perhaps that Zelensky and others may not be too disappointed. They are killed to the last man defending the steel plant in Mariupol. Anyway, it's just a thought.
Huh. Yeah. That is an interesting thought. We certainly, of course, have seen examples of that with Stalin just waiting for potential rivals to be annihilated. Yeah, well, that's interesting that this might be another example. I would mention just one more analogy, perhaps, and it was during our election of 2020, the one we just had. There were fights between the Proud Boys and Antifa. And I think, at least I was for quite a while, taken with Antifa. Oh, those are our guys. And it turns out as time went on, from what I've been able to learn, that Antifa wasn't always the good guys. They weren't just anti-fascists. They were actually in many instances in different places, and they're very splintered, so you can't talk about them as one thing. But in some locations, they were most definitely initiating the violence in the name of anarchism. They kind of blended with the anarchists. So you got to be careful when you look at guys that like to pick up a gun and you think, well, at least there are our guys. That maybe not. I want to spend a few minutes talking about this guy because I think it's useful. He was a rebel journalist, and he got on Putin's bad list quite early. Remember, the first thing Putin did when he got into power was vow to break the Chechen rebels, and he did. But this guy was an investigative journalist, adventuresome, and he went to Chechnya. Like a good journalist should, he put himself in the middle of things, and he discovered, hey, wait a minute, these Chechens, they want to live by their own traditions. Russia shouldn't be imposing their sphere of influence here. But then the point I want to make is he wound up in the eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk. And he started speaking out around 2014 when the fighting was going on, the Maidan protest was going on. And he was saying, well, look, not all the people that live here are Russian infiltrators. There's certainly some, but I think some people here have the same sense of national identity that the Chechens had. And this is primarily internal. This is truly a civil war within this society. Yeah, Russia's playing a significant role, but this is primarily a civil war between two cultural traditions. And we'll get into that more in just a second. And he spoke out, and he was fired by Radio Liberty. He was a stringer for them. And it was after he made a statement about the Crimea, that a lot of people living in the Crimea work at the boat yards and support the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. So that vote that they had in Crimea could have been legitimate. And we learned about the history of the Crimea and how that suddenly went from being administered by the Russian Soviet to the Ukraine Soviet at the behest of Ukrainian Nikita Khrushchev. So I just thought his voice was an interesting, at least the way it was in Donetsk in 2015. Now, I'm going to get to the point. Things have changed in the Donetsk since 2015, and public opinion isn't what it was, and this may no longer be a true civil war. I'll get to that. So we took a trip to Russia in 2016, and our guide, one of our guides, our guides were a very varied group, and some of them were pro-Putin and some of them were outspoken anti-Putin. So they felt at that point, no inhibition to publicly criticizing Putin of foreign visitors. But there was an investigation by the United Nations. They got involved, and they even did a human rights report on what had been going on. And in the United Nations, there were a series of votes condemning the glorification of Nazism. And it's true that the Ukraine didn't vote for it, but when you investigated, the reason they didn't vote for it was because of the defamatory premise of it, that there were Nazis all over the Ukraine, and they couldn't vote for it for that reason. It wasn't their vote shouldn't have counted as being pro Nazi. And then this Human Rights Commission investigated the Odessa incident that I talked about, where pro-Russians were burned alive. And they thought that that investigation had not proceeded, that there were still people who were that should have been jailed that were still running free. The other point I want to make is Putin has always offered a way out of the controversy and the ongoing fight was, hey, just give a special status to the Donbass. And that's what was negotiated in Minsk. He just wanted some kind of guarantee that Russian speakers would not be intimidated. Of course, he goes more beyond intimidation. He says they're persecuted and they're also killed. That's in his words. That has maybe that happened in an individual incident in Odessa here or there, but it wasn't a policy of the Ukraine, certainly. So the Russian speakers, we had this map. Snyder spends a lot of time talking about it. And you can see in the Donetsk, it's greater than 90%. And this is where the fighting is most intense, and Russia now controls, instead of a third of it, 80% of it. So they have made some headway here. Luhansk is just behind, and we see that Russia also had eyes on Kharkiv, but now they're retreating towards Russia, blowing up the bridges. And then, you know, they did this rerun of the election in 2004. We have a pretty good map of how that turned out. And the pro-Yankovic vote was focused right in Donetsk. And Yushchenko, conversely, his vote favorability was focused in Lviv. So I just want to acknowledge the complex variables at work here. You have ethnicity. Are you Russian? Are you Ukrainian? Do you speak Russian? Do you speak Ukrainian? They aren't the same thing, right? You can be ethnic Ukrainian and still speak Russian, like Zelensky, for instance. And then there's the cultural layer. You can identify as ethnic Russian, you can speak Russian, but if your culture, your adapted culture is Ukrainian, what are you? And you're Ukrainian. Then there's always regional politics. So you looked at these voter maps, and somebody can vote for Yankovic just for selfish regional political reasons. He'll get more loot, if you will, more favorable contracts with the government. And then there's just a good old nationalist sentiment. So the question is, do East Ukrainians tend to be ethnically Russian, or do they tend to be Russian speakers of Ukrainian blood? So let's ask them. And a census asked people how they identified. And this are the percentages of people who identified as Ukrainian. And Donetsk, which is the center of Russian language, you see 73% identify as Ukrainian, not Russian, which means, okay, so 27% identify, but that 27% is probably much less now. And I'll make that point in just a second. Another reason why it was as high as 27%, or in some places 38%, is we learned in our history review that Stalin exiled people who identified as Ukrainian to Siberia, where a lot of Ukrainians starved, and he brought in and replaced them with Russians to till the land. So that's one reason. And does that count? It shouldn't. So the nationalist part. So as Carol has pointed out, there is a lot of nationalist cultural sponsored studies. Let's study Ukrainian nationalism, poetry, singing, songs, culture. And all that really started in the 1860s when nationalism swept everywhere in Europe. If you look at the history of Europe and the nationalistic movement, arguably started with Napoleon. And then there's always going to be a difference in the way the East views the world versus the West. So in the East, Russia had serfs until the 1860s. And certainly their system under the Tsars was less participatory. But you can argue when there's a revolution, everybody gets to participate, at least for a while, and until a new order is established. And so you had that. Whereas in the West, you had the attitudes of Austro-Hungary, and which was very, very different. There were no serfs, obviously, and maybe more consent and participation downward, although it wasn't ideal, that's for sure. So people in the West, of course, had a negative attitude towards Russia, but Russian speakers again identified themselves as Ukrainian. And you vote for the Yankovic for selfish political reasons rather than out of any kind of identity issue. So what? The point I want to make is things have changed a lot since that 2001 census. That this nationalist instinct has been turbocharged with each of Putin's interventions. His intervention in 2004, where he poisoned Yushchenko. His intervention in 2013, where he tried to overcome the EU letter of intent, and which led the whole Maidan and the eventual Crimean invasion, which Putin used all this as a justification to take the Crimea. And so today you'll get a quote like this, even in the Donetsk: "We are Ukrainians. Russia's trying to justify invading our cities to kill our civilians, impose a curfew, rob industry, forbid our Ukrainian heritage." So this is a strong nationalist instinct that Putin himself has engendered. All right, so that is back then. What should have been the United States policy watching all this unfold? So remember Saakashvili? He was the leader in Georgia that led the Rose Revolution, and he was a good buddy of Bush. And Bush said, "Hey, let them into the EU. Let them into NATO." And he lasted almost 10 years. Then he was termed out. And so he had been unemployed in 2014, but guess who hired him? Poroshenko, when he won the election in 2014, said, "Hey, Saakashvili's not doing anything. Let's bring him in to be the governor of Odessa. He'll figure it out, all these problems in Odessa, and he'll know how to handle these pro-Russian attacks that Odessa keeps suffering." So he came in and he served for a few years, but he had something to say at the end of his duty after watching America respond to Putin. He thought we should have been stronger. So there's two ways of looking at Russia and the Ukraine. One is we should have just been stronger and pushed Russia back. The other is, hey, maybe we should have been negotiating with Russia. Maybe they have legitimate historical interests. So let's do, we should have been stronger first, and that's represented by Saakashvili. And he said that Russia had to notice that our power was in retreat. He thinks Syria was a special failing. That the red line that Obama drew about chemical weapons, he didn't honor it, and some of the reasons was Boehner, the head of the House of Representatives, let it be known that the House was not going to support any intervention in Syria. And then Putin came up and said, "Well, you know what? I'll solve it. I'll get rid of those. I'll collect those chemical weapons." And Obama said, "Well, if I'm going to have a hard time getting it done, and you think you can do it, be my guest." And so, nevertheless, that signaled to Putin that the United States could be rolled. And so Saakashvili is worried. He's from Georgia. He's worried about Putin just shutting off the pipeline to Georgia. Who's going to oppose that? There's some other things he could do. And every time he lobbied in Washington, he found them making excuses. You guys, you're great. Your Rose Revolution is terrific. Good luck on your peaceful transition to democracy. United States, our plate's full. There's other things we have to do, but we're on your side. Well, he says the United States should have done more all along. Now, Putin was willing to deal. He was a member of the G8. He was thrown out when he invaded Crimea. He was willing to talk then. And then, as I mentioned before, there was the Minsk Agreement. So what was the Minsk Agreement? Minsk is in Belarus, and Poroshenko and Putin met, and who was there? France and Germany. So it was a four-power talk. It was serious, and Putin wanted some kind of special status for Donetsk. That's what he was asking for. And some were given, but not honored in fact. And the excuse was, yeah, I could agree to it, but I couldn't get my legislature to agree. And this is Poroshenko, we're a democracy. I couldn't get it through my legislature. Putin probably not appreciating that kind of barrier, thought that that was a betrayal of the Minsk talks. Even as I mentioned, Putin met with Obama to talk about Syria in the context of ISIS, and I've already made the report comments about the red line problem and Putin looking at that. This, by the way, is Lavrov, I showed early on the attendance of Netanyahu at the Victory Day parade. Lavrov just had to issue a public apology to Israel for some anti-Semitic things he said in the context of going after Zelensky, who is Jewish. But he had to backpedal and apologize for making those kind of remarks. The ultimate person for a balance of power and negotiation is Kissinger. He earned his PhD studying Metternich after the Napoleonic Wars, and how Metternich rebalanced all of Europe for 30 years, creating 30 years of peace. It all went to hell in 1848. But his thing is a balance of power. And he thought that we should have gone into this recognizing that the Ukraine was a part of Russian history, no doubt about that. He mentions who Dan mentioned, Solzhenitsyn and Brodsky, the immigrant Russian who came to America and became our poet laureate. He was against Ukrainian independence, as you'll recall from our previous quote of a poem he wrote. And Kissinger thought the EU had been not nimble at all in negotiating and allowing the domestic politics of the different countries in 27 different countries to stall negotiations with Russia. From Kissinger's point of view, some agreement should have been made that would have folded this confrontation into a cooperative international agreement. And he said, the best you can get is balanced dissatisfaction, in his opinion. We should realize that Russia would not love to have this military solution. And obviously, I'm sure there are parts of it are regretting it, because it meant that there were at risk for isolating itself. And that's exactly what they've done. The doves could always have said, hey, let's not invade. There would have been a group in Russia receptive to compromise. Now this was statement was in February. At the very beginning, we didn't know what the hell was going on. But Kissinger said at that point in time, don't demonize. This guy's a serious strategist with an eye on the premises of Russian history. And we've gone through Putin's long essay from last July, pointing out each point that he made that seemed to distort the history that is we have access to, and that we should not be condescending and lecture Russia on the rules of the world. It should have been clear that Ukraine would not be joining NATO, not now, and maybe I think we said, oh, not for 20 years. I think Kissinger would have argued for a stronger statement, because prominent people like George Kennan, Robert McNamara, Paul Nietzsche, all thought that this was the expansion of NATO so rapidly was going to be a problem. But that Russia, from their part, they need to at least acknowledge Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea, and maybe Crimea would be given a special status like Donetsk, but it should return to Ukraine. And finally, the interest of the Black Sea Fleet. Historically, the Crimea has been a part of the Russian Navy. And remember also that Crimea has a strong symbolic value. You remember that's when Vladimir the Great was baptized in Crimea, and we've been to that site virtually, and where the church stands. And then finally, Kissinger said, hey, there's Finland, there's a model possibly. And then Iko asked the question about Austria, and we learned when running that down, the Austrian off-ramp in 1955, where Khrushchev agreed to pull Soviet troops out of Austria in return for an agreement that they would be neutral and never join NATO, but they would be allowed to join the EU. So there was that. All right, so I'm gonna stop there before I go on to the postscript. We started late. I know some of you have to leave, but before I'll postpone the postscript and only do it if there's if there's a quorum. But any comments on the Ukraine? We're done at long last. Okay.
So I'm wondering if anybody has any updates on what the people in Eastern Ukraine and the Donbas region, if there's any information about how they're feeling about being Russian or not, because your census was fabulous and that was only 2001. So now they've been bombed and it's much later. Are they identifying differently what made Russia able to just claim that they were Russians that he's rescuing?
Well, I think that has become a pretext. I don't think there's a significant number of people there that feel like in the need of rescuing. So I think that's by the board at this point.
Mm-hmm. And then Bob put a really interesting quote in the chat, which is sort of a samurai standard. I mean, you always leave a path, an exit path.
That's from Sun Tzu, I think, from The Art of War, right?
Okay.
Right.
All right. There we go. We haven't had a quote on Sun Tzu. This is the first quote our study group has had from Sun Tzu. Thank you, Bob.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, he's saying what everybody else has been saying, that, you need an off-ramp for Putin. And he looked very dispirited on Monday, yesterday, as though he's wondering, are they going to give me an off-ramp, or what is my off-ramp? What do I do next?
yeah. And it seemed like quite early Zelensky was ready to deal. But then when the Russian approach was so ruthless, and the Ukrainian response was so heroic, I think Zelensky was less motivated to give Putin an off ramp. I think everybody was less motivated.
Well,
Well, now we're really rubbing his nose in the dirt, and yeah, I don't know. I don't practice war. I don't know what to say.
Well, I think we have Saakashvili's tough approach, and we have Kissinger's, hey, let's negotiate. And there should be a lot of gradations in between those two, and let's hope we figure it out. But there's been, with each atrocity, it becomes harder and harder, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's a just by the by, there's a great article in The Economist this week, not the magazine, but I think it's the 1844 publication, I think it's called.
Yeah.
What life was like in Chernobyl in the last 8 weeks until Chernobyl was liberated, I suppose is the word, on April 3rd. And some very interesting interactions between the staff, the administrative staff operating Chernobyl, and their Russian occupiers. Very interesting conversations were had. Anyway.
Okay, I'll check it out. I'll check it out.
Can you say, I don't normally read that, so it's not the Economist. You said it's
I'll send you a link. I can't promise
Okay.
that you've got a right to read it.
right. We'll figure out.
I mean, I don't know if it's a paywall. Oh, I can gift it. I think.
Well, but I
There.
also I have.
Yeah, you have to use the gift box.
Yeah, I don't know if you can gift the whole group, but I can just make a file of it and share the file. I've
That
done
would be
that.
great. That would be interesting.
Yeah, so send that on. I'll look for it. I've got my subscription, and I just barely make it through the major public.
Wait, John, I think you're still recording. Do you want to stop recording?
Well, I think all this has been pretty fascinating. I don't regret recording it, but I think you're right. I think maybe we might be on the border between relevant and personal.